It's the eve of the last full day of campaigning and millions of you are still undecided about how you're going to vote. Who are the undecideds and what difference could they make to the result? And
Thank you very much.
Boris Johnson finally pitches up for the Conservative campaign. Will it make a difference?
Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome to Newsnight for your interviews and insight live each weeknight. Your political panel this evening, award-winning playwright and screenwriter James Graham. There he is. His most recent work, Dear England, is about how Gareth Southgate transformed the England team. Are there any lessons politicians could learn from Mr Southgate? James Graham describes himself, by the way, as a total political nerd. Your words, yes. Salma Shah is former advisor to Conservative Cabinet Minister Sajid Javid. Luke Trill is here from the pollsters More in Common. And we've got Baroness Aisha Hazarika, who is a Labour peer. Welcome, all of you. Thank you very much for being with us and talking to our audience. 2 days to go, as you know, until polls open. And Boris Johnson finally turns up on the campaign trail at a rally with the Prime Minister in Chelsea in London in the last hour. We'll talk about that in a sec. Also tonight, there are still so many of you as yet undecided. We will bring you some facts on that. We'll talk about what the parties are doing last minute to fight for your vote, and we will look back at some of the moments from the election campaign. First, here's what Boris Johnson had to say tonight.
If you want to protect our democracy and our economy and keep this country strong abroad by spending 2.5% of our GDP on defence, which Labour still refuses to commit to, then you know what to do, don't you, everybody? Yeah. There's only one thing to do. Vote Conservative on Thursday, my friends.
Well, let's talk to Nick, who is at that rally. Tell us about the unexpected visitation from Boris Johnson, then.
Well, Vic, as you say, it all kicked off about an hour ago. It's interesting, when I turned up here at the National Army Museum, one of Rishi Sunak's key senior aides sort of gave me a great big bear hug. And I thought, what's that all about? Is that a brave face with all those opinion polls? I thought, no, they look really, really happy. And then all was revealed. There it was. Boris Johnson appeared on the stage under a helicopter. Interestingly, didn't appear on the stage at the same time as Rishi Sunak. Said Rishi's asked me to join the campaign, and that's what he was doing in the final 48 hours. Boris Johnson left, and then Rishi Sunak appeared separately. Now, in that speech by Boris Johnson, it was a classic Boris Johnson speech. He got over what he regards as his key message was, don't let the Putinistas, let the Corbynistas in. By that, he means don't let Nigel Farage, who said that obviously the West had provoked the Russian invasion of Ukraine, don't let him, by voting for reform, let Keir Starmer in, because obviously Keir Starmer supported Jeremy Corbyn a few years ago. Obviously, Boris Johnson glossed over the fact that back in 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, Boris Johnson himself did sort of partly blame the European Union for that. But why was Boris Johnson doing that? Well, the Conservative believe, looking at some research in the Times the other day, that if they can persuade 135,000 voters not to vote for Reform UK, then you could turn what they call a Labour supermajority into not a majority. Anyway, afterwards, I caught up with Michael Gove. So, Michael Gove, it took some time, but finally Boris Johnson makes an appearance, a great rallying cry to the nation, or a desperate last throw of the dice to get those people not to vote for reform?
I think Boris and Rishi are the Bellingham and Kane of this election. Just when everyone's thinking that it was all over, you have two members of a great Conservative team knocking down to the park.
A great Conservative team, but not able to be on the platform together, no hugging or anything like that. A bit distant, wasn't it?
No. What Boris did was to give a full-throated, energetic and passionate defence of what we have achieved together in government. And as he said, he wasn't going to miss this moment when Rishi asked him, in order to make it clear what the choice of this election is, between a Labour government intent on increasing taxes, and which would use, if it was given one, a supermajority to rig the system in its favour, or Conservatives who will cut taxes and defend this country at a time of risk and uncertainty.
I didn't hear a huge amount of praise of Rishi Sunak, though. They're not soulmates, are they?
Well, they are two members of a great Conservative team, and they worked incredibly well together in order to deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, in order to make sure that the furlough programme that we had during COVID was one of the most generous in the whole of Europe. And they also are working together now to alert everyone to the risk of giving Labour a mandate to make the sorts of changes to our economy, to our constitution, and indeed on the international stage that will leave Britain poorer, weaker and more divided.
And you're talking about the dangers of what you call this Labour supermajority. This Conservative campaign isn't now about trying to form a Conservative government, is it? It's about holding back the size of a Labour victory. That's what this is about now, isn't it?
Well, there are opinion polls that do point to the potential for Keir Starmer to have the sorts of sweeping powers that I know that he would like. What I want everyone to recognise is that over the last 14 years, the Conservatives have delivered improved education, improved welfare, managed to reduce crime, got that great vaccine rollout, made sure that we stood shoulder to shoulder with Vladimir Zelensky. Keir Starmer was the guy who tried to get Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister, and the key choice, I think, that he got wrong in 2017 and 2019 is a mistake that I would not want him to make again.
But this Conservative campaign isn't about keeping Rishi Sunak in number 10, it's about clipping the wings of Keir Starmer, isn't
That's
it?
exactly what I said. I said right at the end, let's get Rishi back in number 10 as Prime Minister. That's what I'm trying to do.
So, Vic, obviously that Boris Johnson appearance will dominate the headlines tomorrow, but we will be seeing a lot of Keir Starmer tomorrow around the country. In the last few minutes, we've heard what their core message will be tomorrow from Labour. It will be, don't forget, one rule for them, another for everyone else. Talking about don't forget the economic chaos for which the British people are still paying the price. And finally, they're going to say the core message from Labour, change will only come if you vote Labour, they say.
Thank you very much, Nick. Right, let's get reaction from all of you. But Luke Trill, first of all, as a pollster, can Boris Johnson turning up for the Conservatives, even though he's not on the same stage as Rishi Sunak, make a difference in the last 24 hours of campaigning?
Well, look, we know that Boris Johnson isn't universally popular, but what you do find in the polling and in the focus groups is there are two groups where he has a particular appeal, and they are disgruntled Conservatives who are thinking about going to Reform UK and some disgruntled Conservatives who are thinking about not voting. And that will have been who that message from Boris Johnson was squarely aimed at, a group the Conservatives really need to get back if they're going to avoid those worst projections of catastrophic defeat. So I think it will have juiced up the base and we'll get a few more people out for the Conservatives on election day. OK.
What do you think, Salma Shah, as a former Conservative advisor to a Conservative cabinet minister? Finally, Boris Johnson comes back from holiday to help the Conservative Party.
Well, there's two ways that you could split. There's two cliches that you could use. One is too little, too late, and the other is better late than never. And I'm sure that there'll be lots of Conservatives that will each fall into either one of those categories. Personally, for me, I completely understand what Luke is saying. I think that there is merit in that. I understand that it's about bringing that sort of reform vote that's leaked away from us back in, and Boris is probably the only politician that is able to do that in the Conservative benches currently. I think the downside of that is that Conservatives that are a bit more centrist like me are also still annoyed at Boris Johnson about what he sort of brought about, that's ended up with a great victory in 2019 that he was at the head of, that is now looking like potentially a complete disaster for the Conservatives. So there's going to be a lot of mixed emotions, I think, about Boris Johnson's intervention, very much from where we are sat, not just Conservative voters, but I think people who are active in the party, particularly like me.
Right. Aisha Hazarika, when you see Boris Johnson back on the campaign trail, what do you think as a Labour peer?
I think desperate and undignified, which is, I think, where the Conservative Party campaign is right now. And I think the spectre of Boris Johnson delivering his bluster will only serve to remind people all up and down the country about the 14 years of economic, political, social vandalism that the Tories have wrought on this country. And I'm afraid Boris Johnson, along with Liz Truss, but Boris Johnson is really the poster boy for that. When you think about things like Partygate, when you think about all that he did to the Constitution when you think about how he handled COVID. And I think there's a lot of people up and down the country. Yes, there's a really small number of people who like that shtick. But for so many people out in the country, seeing his face is going to make them think, do you know what, I so want to change from all of this.
James, let me ask you, you as a playwright, you have to, or you do in your job, sum up the mood of the nation sometimes, and guess what? I'm going to ask you to do it right now. Obviously, you...
So easy.
So easy. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. But what are you feeling right now?
God, lots of things. I mean, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I think in my world of TV drama, bringing Boris Johnson back is a bit like when EastEnders bring Cindy Beale back. It's like to the square. Obviously, ratings are suffering. It's like bang, bang, something dramatic.
It's not Bobby Ewing in the shower, is it?
It's not, although it may as well be. I mean...
And for younger viewers, you have to watch that on YouTube.
I knew what that reference was. I mean, honestly, I feel exhausted. And like, I'm like, as you say, I'm like a political nerd, and I love the cut and thrust of politics. And I'm excited. I mean, look, whatever we think about the campaign, how interesting it was, did it shift in the way that 2017 did? Not really. Were there any iconic moments like in 2010, Gillian Duffy, the debate? Possibly not. I think what's about to happen is going to be obviously really seismic. It is historic when a government changes in this country. I think in the past 50... If that happens, I apologise.
Not a vote has been cast.
I know, and obviously we're about to talk about the undecided, so there is a level of suspense, but in the past 50 years, the government has only changed 3 times. Like, it doesn't happen very often if it happens, and there's going to be so many surprises and twists and turns on the night. But I think in terms of like the mood, the soul, the spirit of the nation, it hasn't been a happy, healthy 14 years. Of course, there's been ups and downs, but depending on your politics, it really does feel like the mood of the country is incredibly despondent and disenfranchised, and I can only assume that that's because, you know, in theatre we talk about this thing which is catharsis. It's a theatre word, which is that when you go through a series of dramatic events, there is cause and effect, there is logical consequences, and that gives you a certain amount of release that means you can deal with that trauma and move on. And I do think there's been something about the last traumatic, chaotic, unstable periods of national life which feels like this, every time we think there's about to be a reset, there isn't one. Any moment of calm gets immediately snatched away from us. And I think more importantly, any time we are promised you're going to get back control, or we're going to get this done, or this is going to happen, people haven't seen any significant shift, and I think that robs us of what drama actually gives us, which is a consequence and then that satisfaction that you can look back at it and reflect. So even though we're about possibly to be in this moment of great transition, which is historic, you don't yet feel like that people are hopeful, excited, looking forward. I think we're all just really tired.
And you talk about the people feeling despondent. There are people feeling despondent about the prospects of a potential Labour government, Salma Shah, aren't there?
I think what's interesting about what you just said is that, you know, building that narrative arc, I mean, people like Luke and I, and even Aisha, did that to a certain extent when we were special advisors in government, you know, at worst spin doctors, you know, we were trying to create that storyline. But the reality is, politics, as is life, is messy.
Of course.
And
that's why you've written so many award-winning TV dramas about politics, because there's so much...
Because there's so much mess. But the point that I'm trying to make, I understand that point of catharsis. I think what's difficult, and just to reference what Aisha said, is that Boris Johnson appears and you forget everything that came before it. You forget the fact that the Tories won with a small majority in 2015. You forget that we were on an economic road to recovery. All that stuff then suddenly is shifted away.
Of course, and I totally get, like, I really appreciate, like I'm sure most voters do, that external factors always come into play, the pandemic in Ukraine, and everyone, unlike in a character in a TV drama or a play, everyone is not always the agent of their own change. And you know, I come from a red wall seat, and I was one of the seats in Ashfield in 2019 where they swung away from Labour towards Boris Johnson, I think because of the Boris Johnson effect. So I sort of get the electoral logic of bringing him back, but it does just remind me, you know, 5 prime ministers in 9 years is not a normal thing for the longest functioning running democracy to happen.
And I think as well, and look, we've all been out door knocking and speaking to people. I think wherever you are in British society right now, unless you are absolutely part of that super wealthy kind of elite right at the top, the general lived experience of everybody is that it feels like something's gone really badly wrong with this country. Everything is an endurance test, whether it's trying to get your child into a school, your kid trying to get on the housing ladder, trying to get a doctor's appointment, your house gets broken into, trying to get the police to... Every single thing feels
I'm asking
very...
Luke, because you do many focus groups. Is that what people, broadly speaking, say to you?
I mean, it's absolutely spot on.
Right.
We, at the end of every focus group, ask people to describe the country in a word, to try and sum it up, and the most common word is broken, followed by shambles, followed by chaotic, followed by difficult. There is this real sense that life in Britain has just become a daily struggle for many, and that's why whoever wins the election, I think, is going to have a big job, not just in terms of policy delivery, but in terms of rebuilding trust that actually politics can make a difference.
Sure. Let's ask about these undecided voters then. Who are they? Are there loads of them? Can they actually make a difference? In what way, Luke?
So it's about 10% of likely voters that are undecided at the moment. That's
millions of people.
It is. It's a big group of people. It's not particularly unusual, the number. What is unusual is the profile of those undecided voters. They are overwhelmingly people that voted Conservative in 2019. So you might think of lots of them as disgruntled Conservatives.
Sure.
They're also overwhelmingly women. They tend to be slightly older, and they will be the focus of the campaigns, particularly the Conservatives. Who
we can see that on your graph there. I mean, 55% voted Conservative in 2019 and say they're currently undecided.
Absolutely. So the Conservatives have two jobs with that group. One is just getting them to turn out. It's worth remembering in 1997, lots of former Conservative voters just didn't vote, and that contributed towards Labour's landslide. And then they've got to get them to go out and vote for the Conservatives.
Right.
And I think the issue with that, which is really interesting, certainly a couple of focus groups I sat in on, this was a while ago, in that blue wall area, where the Conservatives have done really well.
So what sort of places are you talking about?
Like Surrey and places like that. What was interesting is so many people who, and actually, it was actually quite a lot of them were the mums, the older women, who were saying, and this was post the mini budget, they were so furious about their mortgages going up, and loads of people are having to remortgage at the moment. And there's something very kind of particular to that group of people. I mean, mortgages across the country or something, but they felt a real betrayal on Conservative values, because their feeling was Conservatives should not be messing with our mortgages. That should not happen under a Conservative government. And then the mini-budget happened.
And Salma Shah, you will know that from that mini-budget time, that coincided with the moment when Labour became more trusted on the economy than the Conservatives. And that position is maintained for the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I fit the profile of the 55%, although I do know which way I'm going to be voting. But I think the difficulty here is the damage that was inflicted by Liz Truss is so massive that actually even being able to try and unwind it, even being able to talk about, you know, inflation coming down to its where it was supposed to be at 2%, it's not cutting through because of the sort of seismic impact that Liz Truss had. So I absolutely recognise that. You know, a reputation for fiscal prudence, a reputation for good economic management, it's always been really at the core. But here's the thing. We are all shifting all over the place at the moment. You know, the Conservatives have increasingly moved towards the centre ground and to left, and now you're seeing Labour move increasingly into centre and right, especially on issues of patriotism, defence and things like that. So there's been this huge sort of swapping of political clothes, you know, throughout the last 5 years.
OK, right, we're going to have a quick look back at this election campaign through the prism of Newsnight.
Massive rumours in the Conservative Party. I stress there are rumours that what this means is the stars are aligning for Rishi Sunak, and there's big speculation amongst Conservative MPs that tomorrow the Prime Minister will announce the date of the election.
And we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
2017, Theresa May reiterated the tens of thousands pledge. Did that happen?
No.
2019 Conservative manifesto.
Victoria, you can go through all of these, and it's quite clear that we haven't achieved what we'd like to achieve.
It's really important because you've made this promise at every single election, and in fact, you've delivered the complete opposite. This morning, we revealed that the investigation into Diane Abbott's comments on racism finished 5 months ago. 12 hours after our story dropped, the Labour leadership have lifted her suspension.
I do feel that there are some people around Keir, not Keir himself, that maybe have watched a little bit too much Scandal or you know what I mean, The West Wing, and think that's how politics is done. That isn't how politics is done, and it is important that somebody like Diane, you know, gets her due respect.
You've extended the student loan repayment term from 30 to 40 years, meaning many graduates will be paying off the debt in their 60s. You invested only a third of what was recommended by the catch-up czar to help kids catch up after the pandemic. Rents rose nearly 9% in the last year, and houses are at their most expensive since 1876. That's why I ask, have the Tories got a problem with young people?
No, not at all.
Faiza Shaheen, thank you for talking to us. Are you the Labour candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green?
Well, I thought I was, and then I literally just got an email, so I'm just in a bit of a state of shock, to be honest.
You got an email tonight. When?
Just like an hour ago.
Saying.
So basically, suddenly I'm at the I'm out campaigning, and my phone's blowing up. They've briefed the press. They briefed the press before they even had the decency to call me and talk to me.
Keir Starmer would put all that progress at risk. He would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000.
He's the British expert on tax rises. They're at the highest level for 70 years.
What he didn't do a knockout punch, he did the jab. And he jabbed repeatedly with the same very effective message, which was £2,000. And inexplicably, Keir Starmer, who should have predicted this was coming, just didn't answer the question.
But he could have dealt with that in the first 10 seconds he heard it. He could have just said the words, "That's not true, I'm not going to do it."
But like, that's independent civil servants in the Treasury.
I'm going to pull you up on that, Claire Coutinho. I'm going to pull you up on that. They're not independent, they're not impartial. The assumptions on which the calculations are based have been made by Tory special advisors, their political appointees, and you and hang on, and that is misleading to voters and therefore very disrespectful. Do the Lib Dems want to still overturn Brexit, yes or no?
No, what we're talking about is is rebuilding the relationship.
Sure.
We can't go back to where we were.
Wales voted for Brexit, didn't it? And so an independent one would have also left the European Union.
Well, in terms of the opinion polls, I think the successive opinion polls have shown that opinion has shifted and Brexit is doing untold harm to our communities.
It's extraordinary that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, at a time where the King, he's advanced his medical treatment, so he was there. This is going to be the last commemoration where survivors, a big commemoration where survivors will be present. I think it's political malpractice of the highest order if Rishi Sunak absented himself for an election interview on ITV.
What happened around Nigel is not an acceptable, not an intelligent form of protest. What I can't pretend, though, is that he hasn't fed into a culture of anger and hatred and othering that ends up manifesting in this kind of aggressive type of politics.
I mean, I was attacked in Sainsbury's. That was what really surprised me. I was thinking, in Sainsbury's, wasn't even little.
I mean, as well as all those tax rises, by 2026 you'll be borrowing £85 billion extra a year. That's double what Liz Truss wanted to borrow for tax cuts in a mini budget. You are going to crash the economy.
So Liz Truss crashed the economy because that borrowing was about unfunded tax cuts.
Yeah, this is also unfunded borrowing.
Well, no, because we're also talking about we're bringing in the other end too, with wealth taxes, a carbon tax, and also bringing capital gains tax.
No, I'm going to pause you right there. Let's be absolutely clear with voters. You are making a choice. You could fully fund and fully cost lifting the two-child benefit cap, and you are making the choice not to do that. That's right, isn't it?
Well, these are trade-offs. We've made the commitment not to increase taxes because the tax burden is already too high on people as a consequence of the Conservative record in government.
I'm going to put this quote to you, if I may. David Olusoga, British historian. I asked him for his reaction to what you'd written in your manifesto. He said this to me: striving for balance in history is illiterate. This is not economics. This is about fomenting divisions in order to win votes.
Absolute garbage. I tell you what foments division. It is the so-called notion of diversity, equality and inclusion.
Reform would love a businessman like this backing them, wouldn't they?
Of course, yeah. Look, I listened very carefully to what you said. I think it's fine to change your mind. The facts change, personnel change at the top and so on. So I think that's fine. but it does strike me as if you are a little bit all over the place on who you've supported. I mean, did I hear correctly?
Nobody less all over the place than me that you'll
Did you support
that
Liz
you'll
Truss's?
ever know in your life.
Did you
I'm
support
clear,
Liz
I'm
Truss's
clear,
agenda?
I'm direct. I did, and there was a
Okay.
reason for that because
really
I was so
radically different to the economic agenda of the Labour Party.
No, it wasn't.
It
because,
really is.
No.
Good evening and welcome to Newsnight, live in Birmingham.
Sorry, we're really busy tonight. We're going to send an ambulance from Stoke-on-Trent an hour away to get to my mother who's been on the floor for 3 hours. Yeah? It's not on.
It is a bit rich of Victoria to talk about the importance of debate in an election. At least she's shown up this evening. I was going to take a missing persons ad out on her this election campaign because the Conservatives haven't got a leg to stand on their record on the NHS. You ducked the Newsnight debate we could have had on health. You've ducked every other opportunity to debate the NHS.
Not everyone is as much as a self-publicist as you are.
OK, well, let's move on. Let's move on.
I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about your record.
In terms of the debate, I was at an event in my constituency, which is made completely
from that
clear
scrap.
to me.
You just literally ignored the two countries where most asylum seekers come from. You're not going to get a returns
big
agreement.
proportion is India, Bangladesh, Albania. We
And
need to deal
you're
with those
still
countries.
ignoring Afghanistan and Iran. Are you saying you're going to get returns agreements with those two countries?
Well, you look at each one on its merits, obviously,
The
but at the
answer's
moment...
no. The betting scandal deepens. Newsnight's been told that up to 15 Conservative candidates and officials are being scrutinised.
Good evening and welcome to Newsnight, live in Glasgow.
Unashamedly pro-immigration for moral reasons, ethical reasons, and for economic reasons. We are a small country of 5 million people. We want to be open, we want to be welcoming, and I am horrified at the way that both Labour and the Conservatives are doubling down on this anti-immigration rhetoric.
Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, declines to rule it out. It's pretty clear why. It's because they've got a black...
Mr. Philp, is this how desperate you are now? You're literally making things up.
That's absolute nonsense.
OK, what's stood out for you, positive or negative, James, in this campaign?
Gosh, just looking back at how Rishi Sunak announced it, that feels like so long ago, doesn't it, with the rain? I think in terms of consequence and impact, it probably is the return of Nigel Farage, both in terms of what that did to the tone and the conversation. I don't think it will actually impact the outcome of who the next government is, but it is going to, I think, going to impact almost what happens next, certainly to the identity and the direction of travel for the Conservative Party.
Luke, have Reform peaked?
I think that they have. We saw them on a steady clip up in the polls. But after Nigel Farage's comments about Ukraine, after the racism scandals that we've seen, they do seem to have at best plateaued and actually in some polls started to tick down.
Aisha, moment of the campaign for you.
It was the D-Day gaffe, entirely self-inflicted, just such a symbol of everything that's gone wrong with the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak's incredible lack of political judgment. And I think all of that builds up to this feeling that, yes, things are really difficult. I know people are feeling quite disillusioned with politics, but this country is aching for change.
Salma Shah.
I have to agree with James, because actually Nigel Farage's return and what that means for the Conservative Party, what that means for a centre-right or a right force in this country is completely changed. And I think that if the Conservatives, you know, on certain polls are predicted to be the third party, I think that's going to be really seismically different for the way our politics is going to work for a very long time.
And there is one poll out tonight, a big MRP poll by Survation. It's their last poll of the campaign, and it's Labour 99% certain to win more seats than in 1997. What did they win in 97? It was 100. The majority was 179. Tony Blair's majority was. They won 418. This says Labour on course to win 484, and Conservatives and Lib Dems pretty close to each other.
On that point, really quickly, just
Briefly.
in history, there have only ever been 6 Labour Prime Ministers. So although we've still got to wait for the polls and we don't know what's going to happen, if this happens, this is a big moment in history.
Yeah. I want to ask you, James, your play, Dear England, which you're adapting for BBC TV drama, is obviously about Gareth Southgate, how he transformed the England team, restored the connection between the players and the supporters, and made them really proud of their identity. One of the most diverse England teams we've ever seen as well. Could politicians learn anything from successful leaders in other fields?
Yes, and certainly when it comes to Gareth Southgate, I'm probably too biased because I've spent a lot of time in his head. But I think one of the things he did that was really successful is, rather than this, his previous managers, rather than this short-term reactive approach to let's just fix this for now, let's just fix it for now, he calmed down, he took a breath, and he addressed issues of the fundamentals of the core of the problem of being an England football team, which was around mindset, culture, identity. He also had a really long-term plan. Like, they had a clock in St George's Park that said we might not win the next one or the next one. It's going to take about 6, 7, 8 years to get there. I think the lack of a long-term project, of a national plan, is one of the significant factors that's seen this country get exhausted and these governments not achieve real fundamental change rather than just skirting around the edges. So if Keir Starmer was going to do anything, and he's talking about a decade, I think he's trying to manage expectations of how long this is going to be.
But remember, in 2019, people talked about a decade of Boris Johnson, did they not, after that 18 majority? I mean, there are events, dear boys, events.
Of course, but I think being a really strong story, I think the crisis in British politics is fundamentally a crisis of storytelling. Often, like, people aren't telling a convincing story that seems to last and sustain itself, that people want to hear and gives people hope. So to do that, you have to structure it. You have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the lack of that clear story in the UK, I think, has been really important.
A quick look at tomorrow's front page splashes. The Times: Johnson, big Labour win, is pregnant with horrors.
Well, he knew all about the word pregnant, let's be honest.
I didn't say that, but Aisha did. The Guardian says backlash over anti-Semitic Tory attack on Starmer. And injury ends Andy Murray's Wimbledon singles career, but there is a gorgeous photo of him smiling there. The final poll: Tories brace for total wipeout. The Daily Mail: Boris and Rishi unite to stop Starmageddon, in red. The Telegraph: Johnson, it's not too late to stop Labour. And The Mirror: 14 years of hurt. Picture of Keir Starmer never stopped us dreaming. Obviously, Baddiel and Skinner, anybody who has supported England for a very long time, like James has, like I have, will know the resonance of those words. Thank you very much for being with us. Please come back. That is it from us tonight. Faisal's here tomorrow on the eve of the election with a Newsnight guide on what to look out for on results night. Thank you for being with us. Thanks for your company. Have a great rest of the evening, whatever you're doing, even though it's now 11 o'clock. Good night.